Namaste all. My name is Arnav Kejriwal. I'm the president of Hindu Students Council. And today we have a special event with HSC Texas Region. Joining me is Pratik Agnur, who is the coordinator for the Texas region of HSC. Pratik is a student at University of Texas at Austin and has been working with a large group of students that go to schools across the Texas colleges across the state of Texas and want to start putting together events on advocacy. So today's event, we'll be hosting Neha Srivastava ji from the Shaktitva Foundation on a special talk about the Hindu framework of feminism. So before we bring Neha ji on, I wanted to have Pratik share a few words of why he started the HSC Texas region and what the group's goals are. So Pratik, namaste, thanks for joining.
Namaste.
Can you share a little bit about your experience at the University of Texas at Austin and what it's like being a Hindu student there?
Yeah, so we have one Hindu org on campus, is Longhorn HSA, and we felt like the HSA was kind of lacking on the advocacy side of for Hindus, and we just wanted to create a sort of network of Hindus across universities in Texas, and with this we can really engage students across Texas and really create a community. Yeah.
What are some of the issues that you guys started discussing? Like I remember one was Kashmir was obviously a big topic and kind of lacking a Hindu perspective. So what are some of the topics that you guys have been discussing as kind of a group before you formally launched the HSC Texas network?
Yeah, so a couple were like the Ram Janmabhoomi issue. Another one is Hindu phobia in academia, caste. There's a variety of issues that we plan to cover in the next couple of months. And we're going to have one talk every month. So that's the plan.
Cool. And in terms of kind of what the goal is for students that go to schools in Texas, obviously with COVID, most students are virtual, probably not even physically at campus. So what's kind of the way that the Texas region HSC is going to be engaging students, and how, if there are Texas students that are watching this stream with Nehaji, how can we get them involved?
Yeah, so the two main events that we'll be having is our speaker series like this, where we would just bring a speaker, and that'll happen once a month. And then we'll also have a bi-weekly discussion session where we kind of talk about what was discussed in the speaker series. So about 2 weeks from now, we'll have a discussion session on the Hindu framework for feminism. And the details of that will be in our Instagram page. And if you want to be involved in this discussion session and just part of the planning for these talks, the Instagram, the link for the sign up form will be in our Instagram bio. So definitely check that out. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And the Instagram, I believe, is Texas HSC.
Texas HSC.
Yep. Cool. And like, just curious, like, what are some of the schools? So I know you're at UT. What are some of the other schools represented in the network so far?
Yeah, so we only have a couple students. We have a UT, included myself included, UTD, and Texas A&M. So we kind of want to expand into like Baylor, Rice, UH. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and I've seen the schedule that you and Samyukta and Megha and Ria and Rohit and all of these awesome folks on the Texas team are starting to put together in terms of Nehaji's talk. And then I know we have 4 or 5 other talks on, I think, like, just broadly identity and kind of Hindu identity or issues of being a Hindu American. Can you maybe like kind of foreshadow some of the other major topics that we plan to cover after we touch on Hindu identity?
Yeah, so in terms of topics, we'll be covering, as I said before, like caste, Ram Janmabhoomi, which is a major topic or a major controversial topic that happened couple months ago. Hindu phobia in academia. Yeah, I mean, those are the topics that are coming out of the top of my head. But we have a list that we have prepared, and we're gonna reveal that list a couple of weeks from now.
Cool. Yeah, and if any Texas students are kind of interested in these types of topics, we definitely invite you to register at that link we shared earlier, the Texas Region page on the HSC website. We can definitely use help in terms of coordinating these talks, coordinating the discussions that happen on the off weeks. We're going to be speaking with a lot of different Hindu scholar activist minds. So, we can definitely use all the help we get, and the larger this network is, the greater the sum of the parts will be. So,
yeah.
I guess, Pratik, like any other words on the Texas network before we maybe start touching on the topic at hand?
No, I think that's it. Covered basically everything that we, what our mission is, and what we plan to do in the future.
Cool. So I guess before we invite Neha ji, she's having some technical difficulties, so we should see her in a couple minutes with her camera working. But what was kind of like the thought process behind bringing Neha ji and the idea of Shakti, which is a really powerful concept in Hindu Dharma? What was the reason for kind of this being one of the first talks that we do?
Yeah, so I'm personally a Shakta. I identify as a Shakta, and I really like the way Neha ji kind of puts that into the perspective of Hindu advocacy. So she really talks about the issues with indigenous Hindu females in India, and how the universal framework doesn't really work with Hindus. Basically, it doesn't really match up. And obviously, Neha ji will talk more about that. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of why I really liked the way she presents herself.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I definitely want to hear Neha ji's words on it, because mine and yours aren't going to do as much justice to the topic. But yeah, I've listened to her speak several times on the concept of Shakti, and it's really impressive, because so many times we try to fit kind of Hindu Shakti within the confines of Western feminism, when really Shakti goes so much more beyond that, right? We're not, I think Neha ji's famous phrase, and I'm probably butchering it, but is, we're not kind of we're not empowering women, right? We're bowing before them, right? Because so many of our different avatars and the forms that the Bhagwan takes, come in women so many times, and it's not just one type of woman. It can be someone who's fierce, someone who's gentle, someone who's so there's so many forms that Bhagwan takes, and so many of them come in that form of Shakti. So very illuminating. So, all right. Okay. We should be ready. I'm just getting her the updated link. So, so Pratik, have you engaged any of the Hindu groups that, like, you mentioned UTHSA, not too far from you guys, there's a couple of Yuva chapters at UH, at Rice. I think Baylor probably has a Hindu Students Association. What's kind of the goal in terms of engaging those folks? Because I know a lot of times they already have activities going, right? They have some kind of Hindu activity going on campus. What's kind of your goal for engaging them and getting them on board for the advocacy efforts?
Well, I think the best, so they don't, a lot of the major Texas universities don't really have a big Hindu org. I mean, UT HSA is there, and then there's like Texas A&M HSA. I mean, they're great Hindu orgs, don't get me wrong, but I think there's not really a big presence of Hindu orgs in the other ones, and the way we can really get to them is through other like Indian community service organizations. So like one here in UT is like Seva. They obviously have a big Seva Charities. They have a big Hindu community there. So just like in every university, try to uh, contact like the major org there. I feel like.
Yeah, and I think those orgs do a great job kind of hosting festivals and bringing general awareness to Hindu Dharma. But what you guys are doing and what we're about to see with you and Nehaji is really delving into how Hindu Dharma actually contributes to kind of our daily life and how it affects like modern day issues and how kind of changing our lens from that sense. So Nehaji is connected. Looks like we got the technical difficulties off. So I'm going to take myself off, Pratik, and I'll let you introduce Nehaji, okay?
All right, sounds good. Namaste, Nehaji.
Namaste, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing well. Finally, I'm sorry, there was some internet issue in my building, so I had to get that sorted out.
Okay, no worries, no worries. Yeah, so a little bit about Nehaji. She is the founder and president of Shaktitva Foundation. She currently has a master's in from Columbia University, and she's working towards another degree in Johns Hopkins University.
Yep.
Yeah, and she does a lot of writing on her website, nehasri.com and shaktitva.org. I definitely recommend you guys checking out her articles. It's there's a lot of good stuff on there. And then another thing that she does is a lot of activism work. So a couple of years ago, one major thing that she did was raise awareness about the Sabarimala issue in Kerala, India. And one of the main, the thing that Shaktitva focuses on mainly feminine issues from a Hindu perspective, and basically general Hindu advocacy efforts. And so, yeah, welcome. And my first question is, why do we need to have a separate Hindu framework for feminism? Like, why can't we just have a Western universal framework just for like Hindu females?
Right. No, I think that's a great question. And it's something that's naturally we wonder, right? Like when we hear about the word feminism, we just naturally understand that this is just like a larger philosophy that you live by. Most ordinary people don't actively go out and do something about feminism, right? It's a philosophy, it's a way of living, and it's a set of beliefs that you sort of inculcate in your life that women are equal to men. And then from there you sort of start like you question certain social mores if you come across them, where you might think that there is a discrepancy, and a lot of times the general way we think about feminism is under the umbrella of this belief that women were not always equal to men. And so a conscious effort needs to be brought in even as we progress through modernity to bring to set the course right, or fix that problem. Now that is now 90% of this world thinks about when they think about feminism. But if you actually dig into feminist theory, a lot of the assumptions that we make about the past, and a lot of the conclusions, based on the assumptions from the past, the conclusions that we have drawn about the future, right, depends upon the society you are studying, right?
Yeah.
So it is not a lot of people would probably recognize that feminism emerged as a reaction to what was happening in the West, right? So the first feminist movement, which is the suffrage movement, asked for equal voting rights for women. Because at that time, the Western society did not give those rights. And why did they not give those rights is a deeper conversation, because at that time, the pervading belief was that women were not intelligent enough to take, the important decisions of the society.
Yeah.
And their place was in the home, etc. So from there, the early suffragettes started building their case, and then they started studying the society, and they started studying not just whether there was bias, but also why there was bias. And then there was a lot of discussion and a lot of intellectual work has happened in the last 100 years that includes building up the argument of where we are today. However, this is the key part to understand here. There's, first of all, like, feminism should not be understood as a monolith. It is a lot more complicated than just one one worldview. And in that sense, we understand that, and when you start looking at it from a finer from a finer tooth comb, you'll recognize that, first of all, in 1920s, after the initial movement, women were fighting for voting rights, and according to everybody in the world, they think that women got voting rights, right? In America, women, and some of the Western countries, women got voting rights. Fun fact: women did not get voting rights. White women got voting rights.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So they used Black women who were members of the contributing members to the society at that time as bodies in the protests. But when the time came for results to show, Black women did not get voting rights with the rest of the women. They got the voting rights with the rest of the Black people.
Right.
So a brilliant feminist highlighted that way later in the 1940s, that, well, in fact, like, maybe it was like even later, where that, this is not a monolith, right? The women is we're talking about 50% of the world's population. Clearly, our interests don't align on every single front. While yes, it is true that if women per se are banned from doing something, then yes, all women will be affected by that. But there are other factors as well that sort of contributes to the lived experience of women. This was the birth of intersectionality, right? So the idea was that just the state of being a woman is not what contributes to your lived experience. There are other parts of your identity also contribute, which is that if you're a Black person, the history and the culture and the oppression that comes with the color of your skin would be very much a contributing factor in the women's experience, as it would be for a man. And so then you add the layers of religion, and you add the layers of every other lens that you can think of, where society tends to discriminate. So power, the socioeconomic classes, all of those things would contribute towards building that understanding. So that's the concept of intersectionality. Now, this intersectionality is still somewhat better known, at least in American college circles. But there are some other criticisms of feminism. So understand that intersectionality is not just feminism itself, it's also a criticism of mainstream feminism, right? So because it's criticizing an aspect, it's criticizing the belief that all women have similar aspirations and similar beliefs, and because it ignores the other parts of their lived experience. And this is the intersectionality is the one that kind of reminds us that other parts of our existence, if that causes discrimination, that becomes very much a feminist exercise to fight those excesses, right? So which is why racism fighting against racism becomes an feminist ideal. So it is not just a type of feminism, it's further on, it's a criticism of feminism. So similarly, there are other criticisms of feminism as well. One of them is indigenous feminism. And that basically is the concept that certain societies, like all the isms, and the West primarily, because of its long history of colonialism, tends to see everything in a very Eurocentric, white-centric way. So they frame their arguments, they frame their entire worldviews based on what happened to them, and then they decide. So, like, the other cultures become an afterthought, right?
Right.
So, and in fact, for the longest time, other cultures were not even an afterthought, and they believed they were the only civilizations, and everybody else was just a thing that needed to be fixed. So
Yeah.
that was the history of colonialism. So indigenous feminism basically reminds us that feminism, if understood with the Western lens and as it is imposed upon the other cultures, especially on indigenous cultures, can be neo-colonizing in itself, right? So
Okay.
indigenous feminism reminds us that we have to be constantly be mindful. As feminists, we have to be constantly mindful about every single issue, and we have to look at it from a decolonizing lens. So we need to be careful that we're not, are we doing justice, like are we seeking justice, or are we trying to do cultural erasure? Are we using a Western centric lens and imposing it upon this new culture that we have encountered, or our own culture, and just thinking that we're comparing it to the West and saying, well, it's not the same, so there must be something wrong, right? So that is a type of cultural erasure, and we must stay away from that. So that is indigenous feminism. And the third thing that I would mention is transnational feminism. And transnational feminism is sort of a wordplay. So just one line of history, I won't go too much into detail about this. There's a beautiful book by Sireen Kader called Decolonizing Universalism, a Transnational Feminist Ethic. People who are interested in digging deeper into the theory, I would highly recommend you guys read that. But transnational feminism is basically another critique of feminism. And this one is actually very relevant to our situation as much as the indigenous one is. So both of those go hand in hand. And transnational feminism basically says, when, like, think of it like this: when you have white women making laws and policies, and as we know that the predominant majority of people who get a voice on the international stage, even today, remain white.
Right.
Percentage of the population wise, they're a very small number on the international community, but their voices are still very dominating.
Mhm.
And feminism is no different. So on a global stage, when we end up like having discussions on feminism, often it is white women that dominate that narrative.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned before, that oftentimes other cultures become an afterthought. So similarly, in feminism as well, it becomes an afterthought. And while the white women want to help out women of, say, third world countries or underdeveloped countries, or whatever criteria they've come up with, sometimes, as much as they want to help out, they make policies without listening to those women that they were supposedly helping.
Yeah.
So, for example, if a global policy is being made on helping the rural women of India, or Africa, like how it's often combined, right? How it's often advertised, they would actually not even bother to go and talk to the rural women of Africa.
Yeah.
Right? Or rural women of India. So Sireen Kader shows that beautifully, and she actually critiques one of the most advertised scheme these days, which is I think you might have heard of a scheme called microloans.
Yeah, I think that I might have heard of that.
So corporates and like developed nations, there's even companies have started this, and there are nations that send out aid to various countries, and the purpose of that aid is that it will be handed out to women entrepreneurs in the form of microloans. Right?
Okay.
Now, Sireen questions, and she takes up an example, and she questions whether while it may seem good on paper that, well, you're making a woman independent and you're making, you're getting her to start a business and she's going to become, self-independent, financially independent, and that's going to be wonderful. And they often go out and publish all these fantastic stories about how it worked. And it may have, right? For some women, it might. But Serene goes on further and questions that whether these policies even affect the underlying issue. Why did this woman need to be, empowered financially? What was the underlying cause that brought her to such a situation? And if we don't fix that underlying cause, does that actually do anything for the woman? Right? I based on my own experience, I go on and question and I ask them, is this really what they wanted? Right? When you're making this policy, did you consult them? Did you survey them? Did you ask them what their main concerns were? And at 80-90% of the time, I can tell you that never happens. Right?
Yeah.
We will never actually end up surveying the rural women of India. And I speak about India mostly because that's my area of expertise. And 80% of the time, the foreign NGOs will come in and they're based on the mandate, whether they have a corporate mandate or whether they have a CSR mandate or whether they have a UN mandate, and they'll come and they'll basically decide this is the policy, right? And now this is how you have to take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And there's in fact a joke that I had. I was talking to a very experienced social worker in India, and she joked that, you know what, half of the time the villagers are so smart, they know exactly what to say to the survey people so that they would get the benefit. These policies don't really bring social change, but
Yeah.
the villagers just know how to leverage that.
Right.
So
Right.
there's the original objective of the policy is not fulfilled. The white women were like, whoever actually came up with this policy gets a feel good factor that they saved the world today, and they go to bed happy and everybody is happy, right? But the situation on the ground remains the same. So the reason I sort of went over international, sort of intersectionality, indigenous feminism, and transnational feminism is to highlight that, first of all, based on where you're from and which culture you belong to and which region even you belong to, feminism needs to change. It needs to adapt because there are all these there are all these sophisticated criticisms from within the feminist community that have already been raised, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to that effect, what does that mean for Indic people, right? People and Indic people we mentioned is basically the dharmic people, the people who have a completely different philosophy, who have thousands of years of civilization, and who also have a geopolitical landmass that they call home. In addition to our, what we saw like Matrabhumi and the Karma Bhumi. So the people who came from India, even though they may be settled elsewhere, they may have made a life elsewhere, they may have, migrated elsewhere, a lot of their lived experience does remain connected to their philosophy. They still live by the same philosophy. Just because you move to America does not mean that you just become white. Even if you wanted to, you couldn't.
Yeah.
Right? And in being white, I don't just mean racially, right? Even in thought and action, you don't. There's a lot of things are being said that you need to sort of assimilate. That's a nice way of saying it. But what does assimilation mean, right? I must drop my bindi, I must change my sari, I must change my salwar kurta and switch into jeans pant and try to act like a white woman, and maybe the society will accept me.
Yeah.
So even that doesn't truly happen, right? So when we as Indics choose to live in a different society or even in our own society, there are a lot of things that are different. And so accordingly, the problems that we face, the situations that led us to this point, we even, in fact, even if you take a symptom, maybe a white woman faces the same issue and a brown woman faces the same issue. They could be at the face of it, they could seem like the exact same issue. Even then, there could be layers and layers of the reason of why those things are happening to two different women could be very different based on where we're from, right?
Yeah.
So that is the reason why we have Indic feminism. I know I sort of gave like a vaguish answer, but the idea is that if we live by a different philosophy, if we live in a civilization, or are a product of a civilization that has gone through its entirely different life cycle, right? That has had its own attacks, that has had its own influences, that is governed by the different philosophies, then it begs to reason that the issues that that society faces would also need that lens. And similarly, feminism being a movement to reclaim the space that women once had. And notice how I say reclaim, right? Because I am not making the argument that women never had that space,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And that is how it becomes different, because I'm not going to go with the theories that Western feminists throw, which is that women never had this position, it was all patriarchy, and now we must fight this, and now we must overthrow the patriarchy. There's this assumption that the experience of the women in the West was exactly the same as the experience of the women in the rest of this world, and that is absolutely not the case.
Yeah, definitely agree with that.
So
But
that was the reason, yes.
yeah, so that's great. But like, what does the Hindu framework look like? So I understand, there's different criticisms of feminism, where there's the indigenous and the transnational and the intersectionality. But what does the Hindu framework look like, and what philosophies or sampradayas does it take inspiration from?
Right. So Hindu framework, I'm sure there can be many, and one of the guiding principles for the one that I have chosen, and as it may show from the name itself, is the philosophy of Shakti, right? The philosophical concept of Shakti. And what I mean by that is that in Hinduism, there is this larger concept of Purusha and Prakriti, or Shiva and Shakti, right? But
Right.
even before that, like if you just do a very pure, dissociated, anthropological dissection of Hinduism, right? Not even as a believer, even just as you notice it, the first thing that you will notice is that I believe population wise, Hinduism is the third largest followed religion in the world. It has the third most adherents after Islam and Christianity. And it is still the biggest and the only major religion in the world where there is a very, that's a full-blown concept of the divine feminine.
Yeah.
In every other religion, God is man, right? And even the Buddhism, like it evolved from the philosophy of Hinduism, and it is a dharmic philosophy. Even in that, you don't see the divine feminine at such a central stage as you would in Hinduism, right? So
Right.
that's
Right.
number one. And this is not even specific to sects of Hinduism, right? This is not even it's not even, you can't even say that this is only like a few Hindus believe that. No matter which major sect you're from, whether it's the Vaishnavas or the Shaivas or the Shaktas, each of them have a central place for the divine feminine.
Mhm.
Right. So it is in fact said that it's not possible to be a Shaivite until you also worship Shakti. So there is this in Durga Chalisa, which is it's a Chalisa is like a group of 40 verses, and written in Awadhi. So Hanuman Chalisa is the most popular one. But for people of North India, and I'm sure it's recited in South as well, Durga Chalisa is also another very popular Chalisa that is often recited during Navratri and all the all the festivals of the divine feminine.
Yeah.
So in that there is a small stanza which says, Shankar acharaj tab keen ho, कामरू क्रोध जीत सब लीन हो, निष्दिन ध्यान धरो शंकर को, हाहू काल नहीं सुमिरो तुमको, शक्ति रूप को मरम न पायो, शक्ति गई तम बन पछतायो, शरणागत हुई कीर्ति बखानी, जय 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 जगदम्ब भवानी. So what it means is Shankar here refers to Adi Shankara. And it says, Shankar Acharaj Tapkino, he did tapasya which shook the world, right? He did such a high, such a penance that it shook the world. Shankaracharya Tapkino, Kamaru Krodh Jeet Sablino. He won over all. He won over all his indriya, all his sensory organs. He was able to control, and he was able to transcend all material belief, right? Nishdin Dhyan Dharo Shankar ko, every single day he would wake up and he would worship Shiva. The second Shankar is like it's a reference to Shiva, and so he says every morning he would wake up and he would worship Shiva, but he would not remember Yuma. So the author is speaking to Ma, right? In Durga Chalisa. So he's saying but he would not remember Yuma, right? Shakti Roop ko maram na payo. He did not understand the Shakti Rupa. He couldn't understand the importance of Shakti Rupa. Shakti gayi tam man pachtayo. So when he lost his Shakti, that's when he repented. Right?
Okay.
So the author is speaking to Ma, and he's saying, like, see, Adi Shankara, this great guy, he was doing all this tapasya, right? And he won over all his sensory, he transcended materialism in a sense. And he every morning he would wake up and worship Shiva, and he did not understand, but he forgot about you, Ma. And see, he did not understand the value of your power. So only when he lost his own Shakti, his own power, is when he repented. Right? Shakti Roop ko maram na payo, Shakti gayi tam man pachtayo, Sharnagat huit kirti bakhani. That's when he realized what folly he had made. And when he came and he told the entire world about the beauty of your power. Right? So he says that, Sharnagat hui kirti bakhani. Kirti bakhani is meaning he's telling about the kirti of you to the entire world. Jai 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 Jagdam Bhavani, right? And then that's the final, like, oh, bow to the mother. So this is, in fact, like a very key stanza that I always refer back to when I'm talking about how important Shakti element is even in the Shaiva beliefs. Yeah. And so all of these beliefs have a central place to divine feminine. And when I say central, it's not the role, it's not just a role of a consort, right? It's not just the wife of Shiva. It's not a side character where, like, for instance, Virgin Mary is reverential only because she gave birth to Jesus, right? Otherwise, she doesn't have divinity of her own. We're not talking like that. Here, she is in her own might. She is the power, right? Yeah. In fact, under some of these philosophical schools, she's named Shakti, right? What does that mean? It means she is the power, right? All of these gods and all of these, all of the divinity that we have, their power is what is called as Shakti, and she is the divine feminine. So is that, in that sense, that's why we have this, that's why we sort of have this divine principle of divine feminine. And so that is where I brought in this element, because this is unique to Hinduism, and in that sense it's unique to dharmic civilization, and I'm sure there are other indigenous cultures as well that also have the divine feminine, but the Shakti concept is similar to what we have, is exactly what we have in Hinduism. And that's why this beautiful connection that the two of the Purusha and the Prakriti have, and the Shiva and the Shakti have, which is that they complete each other. This is not a master-slave relationship. This is not a dominant-submissive relationship. The relationship between the divine feminine and the divine masculine, it is a relationship of equals, but different. And so that is the governing principle of Indic feminism. And the reason I think this has to be the governing principle is because in all the other schools of feminism, in fact, in all the schools of feminism, until you define what is the end goal, you're sort of going all over the place, right? If you don't do we want equality? Yes, and if that equality is what we want, then what does it mean, right? What does equality look like? It's a very loaded term to say we want equality, but what does it mean? Do I need to start wearing pants? Is that equality? Should I, do I need to abandon my individuality in order to get that equality? And that is those subtler questions have what has created the various waves of feminism, in fact.
Yeah.
So for us, the ultimate goal, right? Ultimate, what we say is our principle, our key principle is the Shiva and Shakti principle, and that what defines our relationship of what the utopia is.
Okay. Okay.
So that's where the feminist like Shakti principle comes from.
Yeah. So that's great. Like in the philosophical point of view, but practically, what are the pressing issues that you think that Hindu women face that Western feminists that they tend to overlook or they might not address?
Yeah. Where do I start? No, I think, see, the most important issue, and that I think is sort of like is the underlying issue for everything, um, which sort of boils down all our criticism, is that first of all we don't have a voice, right?
Yeah.
We and this is not just a Hindu women problem, it's a general Hindus problem, but it becomes exacerbated, especially when the topic is about Hindu women and when other groups tend to use us as weapons against Hinduism, right?
Yeah.
So, which is what we saw in Sabrimala. So, there was this open pretense that somehow Hindu women were being, like, the rights of Hindu women were what people were fighting for in Sabrimala. And yet somehow we found that the voices of Hindu women were not given any weight.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's number one. That's the key issue, that there's just absolutely absence, or in fact, there is active suppression of voices that are Hindu, coming from Hindu women, that are not following a pre-decided script, right? A Hindu woman might get a op-ed in New York Times, but only if she writes a certain way, right? If she is willing to
Yeah.
criticize her own culture, if she conforms to whatever is the whatever is the flavor of the day at New York Times. And if you agree with that, like, yes, you will get the platform, but otherwise, sorry, you're not welcome. And in fact, you might actually be derided. They might mock you. Recently, we were called Bindi activists, and I thought that was a great word, but the person who was actually using it was using it as a pejorative term.
Okay. Okay.
So we are, if we're not being ignored, we're actively being dismissed, and we are even being mocked. So that's the biggest problem, that we don't have a voice on the table, even on matters that concern us. So that was where the entire journey of Shaktitva began, like from Sabrimala issue, and we realized that we cannot leave this to chance. Like, we cannot just be reactionary. We need to actively develop something in that front. And then once we got into this, we got into this field, we realized there was a need to do a lot more, and so that's where Shaktitva came from. The second key issue that I think, once again, it's even a matter of life and death for us, is what we're seeing in Pakistan right now.
Yeah.
Hindu women are getting abducted at gunpoint, taken away from their families, forced converted, and raped, which then the local government, the collusion with local government, the perpetrators would pretend as this was a marriage. And then the judges and judiciary would actually, of Pakistan, even when the cases of these forced abductions and forced conversions are taken to the judiciary in Pakistan, the judges pretend that this was a consensual conversion.
Mm-hmm.
There was a survey by I believe it was called Aurat Foundation. If I'm sorry, I'm missing the name. That surveyed and found that more than 1,000 women a year of Christian and Hindu minorities in Pakistan are being forced abducted, raped, and converted. And guess what? The entire world is silent. I'm not seeing any global outrage on this, right? And the reaction is even worse than the kind of reaction we had for Yazidi women. they still haven't had their chance in to speak up, right? Whereas you look at the other immigrant circles, you look at Rohingyas, their voices have reached every corner of the earth. But
Exactly.
the Yazidi women, the Pakistani Hindu women, they're children of lesser gods, so they don't get their chance
Yeah.
to be a part of this discussion. So that's
I think this is also an issue in South Asia in general, with Bangladesh, India as well,
absolutely.
Afghanistan. Yeah,
We saw the issue with Nikita Toma, right? Like
yeah, yeah,
in India, also, it's not any better.
yeah,
And even then, even now, after Nikita Tomar's brutal case, when government decided to take a look at it from a legal perspective and actually analyze if there was a pattern to this sort of like, and took the value, they took the statements of the family at face value. The victims were being derided, their mothers were being derided.
yeah,
And in fact, one woman went on to call this as consensual, like policing of consensual relationships. Could you believe that? Did Nikita Tomar consent to murder? Like, what kind of ridiculousness are we living in? And that is the kind of feminism that is pervading in the society, right? They only take up issues that suit their political narrative, and so in that sense, feminism is not a value principle for them. It becomes like a sort of a tool to deploy against the other party. We will just, whenever I'm angry at it, yeah, if I'm a woman, I can always take out the weapon and attack you. But when it actually comes to doing something about helping women, we're nowhere to be found. So
yeah,
that is definitely some of the pressing issues that we need to be actively looking at, and we are looking at those issues from Shaktitva.
yeah. That's great. So, how about the Hindu American women? Like, how does that, or like, what are some pressing issues for Hindu American women?
Yeah.
What is Shaktitva doing about it?
Right. So we work in America. Like we are registered in America, and as a charity, we've worked primarily with two groups so actually three groups of Hindu American women. And we don't only work with Hindu Americans; we work with all women. But the governing principle, it remains the principle remains rooted in Hinduism.
Okay.
So one of the groups that I worked with, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but there's a very big community, and there's a lot of them in Texas. A big community of Hindu refugees from Bhutan,
Yeah, yeah,
in Texas, and in other parts of America, and they are a refugee community whom we often work with, and what does that work entail? One of the things that we realized in meeting with them is women especially are targeted even after, see, I don't know if you guys know their story. It's really heartbreaking. In Bhutan, in the 1990s, I believe, there was a regime change, and there was a push for reclaiming the land for Buddhists only. And so this community, which was a practicing Hindu community, was chased out because they were original immigrants 100 years before that from Nepal. So in
okay,
their own community, they only spoke Nepali. So they were living in Bhutan. They were established in Bhutan for centuries, but they spoke Nepali, so they were first considered as outsiders, and then they were not even Buddhist, so they were chased out. And overnight, lakhs and lakhs of them were literally uprooted from their families and dumped on the Nepal border. And so the Bhutan Nepal border happens to also be next to Indian border. So
yeah, yeah,
Indian government at the time did not do a lot of help. Like they did try to mediate, but they were not even very proactive about it. And so this community was sort of left abandoned because they couldn't go back to their home. And Nepal is a small country, so how much could they take, right? There were like close to 90 lakhs of them, I imagine. So over a period of years, a lot of them still probably live in refugee camps in different parts of that border. So some of them were finally moved to America, unbeknownst to known to them, right? Like, and know this, that they were being attacked because of their religion. because of the faith they held. So they were given refuge in America, and now they have papers. Now they have, like, they've built life of themselves, so they're not actively being attacked. Like, the immediate concerns are over.
Right. Yeah.
But now their community is being targeted by missionaries, who often single out women, especially young girls in colleges. And one of the things that they use to convince the person that they must abandon their religion is a very sort of distorted way of talking about the menstrual restrictions in Hinduism. So Nepal, some of the Nepali community and even that Bhutani community are very strict, but still very strictly practice the menstrual restrictions that are put forth in Hinduism, even as the mainland Indians have sort of, adapted to not doing it, or different, like they've sort of moved on from it. But the Nepali community at least the Orthodox community is pretty strict about it. So the missionaries actually target these young girls and tell them that because your parents are forcing you to practice this menstrual restrictions, it shows that this religion of yours is anti-women. And the irony of Christianity saying that is really not lost on me.
Yeah.
And so therefore you must consider, like, this is very oppressive, this is very regressive, you come from a third world country, now you're in America, why don't you sort of upgrade yourself, and you follow our ways and our principles and whatever. So the community is struggling with that, because the older generation is now heartbroken, because they've ran from their homes because of their religion, only to come and find that their teenage children are leaving that exact thing, that piece of identity because of which they went through so much. Is just I'm sorry. Thank you, Suvediji. I saw the comment. So like, it's just heartbroken, and there's a big generational gap that is happening between those families. It's breaking them apart, and it's just stupid. So we reached out to them, and we had a camp in 2018 where we discussed what was the philosophical and theological basis of those menstrual restrictions. And by the way, hello, menstrual leave. It's a burning feminist issue, and in a way that ancient restriction was not anything different than menstrual leave in that social context, right? We definitely need to adapt to it, because we're in a modern scenario now, and a lot of those things probably cannot be realistically done. Technically, I'm not supposed to step out of the house, right? But I'm not getting a leave from my office, and I'm definitely college students are not getting a leave from their exams for that purpose. It would be great if we could, but we're not. So unfortunately, we have to suck up our cramps and show up. But that whether or not we adapt has absolutely nothing to do with why it was set up, right? And the fact that this sort of ignorance is being capitalized upon in such a disgusting way to break up families, especially of refugee families, is heartbreaking. So that's one of the things that we do. Another community that I work with is domestic violence victims in the South Asian community, specifically within the Hindu groups. And I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a big issue, especially people coming from India. There's this, the wives are getting abandoned in this country, and a lot of them happen to be Indian citizen. And not only
in the US.
In the US, yes.
Okay.
So girls are getting married to they're coming from India after getting married. Whether it could be a person, the person they're marrying could be an NRI, meaning like he could be an Indian citizen living abroad, or he could be an American citizen, and then that happens a lot. But understand that when a woman is coming only for marriage, she does not have her own financial independence, so her visa is dependent on the husband. And if the husband chooses to exert control over that, to harass her or to beat her and to leave her, she actually becomes completely disenfranchised in the present American system. So Obama's government passed a law called VAWA, which is Violence Against Women Act, that has helped and these women can apply for a certain type of visa, which allows them to stay in the country. But the problem here is that they have young children. Often those children are born here, so they're American citizens, which means that the father can now sue for custody. And if they have shared custody, the woman who is an Indian citizen will now have to prove her custody case in America. And how do you split custody if you're not in the country? And you cannot take those children back to India because that the court in America considers that to be abduction. So a criminal case can be filed against her if she tries to leave the country. And she's not even, half of the time, they're not even legal. And there is the only way, even under VAWA rules, the woman has to show a certificate from an authority confirming domestic violence. And a lot of time when the incidents occurred, police was not called because of societal pressure, or they showed up and they didn't issue the certificate or whatever. There's this bureaucracy that happens. So a lot of these women are under dire situations in America with nowhere to go. And the legal system is, they have to traverse this legal system in a completely different country. A lot of them don't even speak the language. And so that is a big group that we work with. And that Shaktitva works with. And the third group is you. So we work with, college students in America. And the purpose of the third group is not so much as solving a social burning issue, but I've realized that a lot of this, as I mentioned before, right, a lot of the commentary that we're seeing, whether it's sort of things like we saw with Holi against Hindutva, or the prominent issue of Hindu phobia, or the pejoratives used about Bindi activists, as I mentioned, or even this leveraging menstrual taboo to facilitate conversions. A lot of time, all of this is happening because our own community has this sort of ignorance about our own culture. Right. And it's not necessarily just the fault of our community itself. And we can't even just blame the education system. Frankly, what has happened is not enough research and not enough work has been done in this field as it should have. So we have, if you try to find material on the divine feminine in established social studies journals in America, or any, to the global, in the global journals, you will not find very good work. Even today, the one book that dominates understanding of Shakta philosophy, the one most thorough book, was written 100 years ago by Arthur Avalon. Right? So we've just not built that scholarship. And that is partly to be because of colonization, the active colonization by the British, and then also mental colonization of the Indians that inherited the country after the British. So we've just not put in enough work. There's not enough material out there. So one of the mandates of Shaktitva is to facilitate that research. So we write grants, we work with authors, we work with researchers, we work with scholars, and we're going to scale this up hopefully next year in a big way. Where we want to engage more and more, from the academic community, and we want to produce a lot of throughput in clarifying a lot of these Hindu concepts in the way Hindus believe in it, right? Not what Christians think we believe in, not what social justice people think we believe in, but what actually the logic was, and according to Hindus, what we believe in. So one of those examples could be for instance, we recently did a campaign on Raksha Bandhan. And maybe I'm sure a lot of you must have seen it. It went viral on Instagram. What we did was we clarified, and this was a research article that I had written based on, I am from North India. So I've been practicing Raksha Bandhan ever since I was born, practically, because I have two elder brothers. So we've always had our own way, and we've understood Raksha Bandhan to be a certain festival. And that never fully sat in well with the way it was projected to be in mass media. Well, initially we didn't think much about it. It was, but then it sort of, I noticed that in recent years it had become a feminist issue, where women thought that women were starting to post statuses on Facebook, or at least some articles. Initially, I thought these were just interspersed articles, and nobody really thought of this way. But I was wrong, and a lot of women started thinking that it is sexist to seek protection from the brother. Why, like, women are not abla nari, we can protect ourselves, or why do I need to appease you to protect me, or whatever. Like that was a whole thing. I don't want to get into that. So the whole thing was so absurd, because in reality Raksha Bandhan does not at all mean that it's not an annual reminder to the brother to protect his sister.
Exactly.
Now, the brother-sister relationship in Hinduism is sacred no matter what, right? He is going to protect you if he's a good brother, irrespective of whether you tie that thread or not, and whether or not you fight or whatever.
Yeah.
That's just his dharma, right? And duty is
Yeah.
not dharma. The dharmic duty is not contingent upon other things, right? It doesn't only work when you tie that thread.
Yeah.
So that festival's mainstream description of that festival didn't make any sense. So I actually wrote an article about that, which is where I analyzed what the tradition really means. And I did it two ways. One is I analyzed the folk stories that go with the tradition. Like when we tie the raksha, we have a particular way of talking about it. And the second piece of evidence was that I tied in how Hindu symbols work. So I won't go into all the details of the article, and I encourage you guys to read it. But if you find and then I wove that in with the historical stories in the Puranas about the origins of Raksha Bandhan, and we found that Raksha Bandhan, in fact, was the woman or the girl blessing the thread, with her, like, basically praying to God and consecrating the thread with her blessing, and the act of tying it on the brother's wrist actually is for his protection.
Oh, okay.
So when you wear the Rakhi, it is me, the sister, praying for the well-being of my brother, and the Rakhi is supposed to protect you, not me.
Yeah. Right.
And in fact, and this is, if you go back several generations, you'll notice it wasn't even a brother-sister festival always. It wasn't an exclusively brother-sister festival, because if you look at the original mention in the Puranas, the story is found in one of the Puranas, where Indrani actually happens to tie that thread to her husband Indra. For protection. So she seeks blessings for his well-being, because he's about to go to a war, and she ties that thread, and that thread protects him in the war. So he doesn't lose, even though by every imagination he could have lost. And so he wins that war, and that's when Sri Krishna explains to Sri Yudhishthira that this process of Raksha Bandhan, that's the first usage of the word that we can find. This thread of Raksha Bandhan is the protective spirit that sort of protected Indra in that war. So as a king, you must now institute that as a festival in your nation. This is what Sri Krishna tells Yudhishthira. And so from there, the festival evolved. And to this day, and he tells how to celebrate that festival in that reference itself. And to this day in Banaras, that is how the festival is still celebrated, where priests actually go out to every prominent member of the community and tie the thread on their wrists. So that is Raksha Bandhan even today in Kashi. And it's not even just human. We're not even specious, right? So it's not just the protection of humans. He also ties it on the trees. He ties it to the wells. He ties it to the animals of the village in order to protect them. So that sort of that blessing is extended upon the community at large for their well-being. So in the Mughal times, that probably, and this is like a little bit of guesswork because we don't have documentation to support this, but my best guess is that in Mughal times, because so many brothers were going to war, and it was a time of turmoil for the nation. So many brothers were going to war and getting defeated, and maybe sisters were not able to see them ever again. So this tradition started where annually women started consecrating the thread for the well-being of their brothers. And that was also a way for brothers and sisters to meet, and sometimes that involved inter-village travel. So it that was a sort of instituted as an annual festival where the women were blessing their brothers specifically. So if we'd known this, right, our entire argument that it's a sexist or it's a misogynist festival falls apart.
Yeah.
And this is just by a small research. So we converted that into a cartoon, or rather like an I don't want to call it anime, but basically like in a meme maybe, into a series of memes where Bharti is a character that I love, teaches this fun fact to her friend, and that was really well received by the audience. Similar articles about Holi, after the Holi against Hindutva thing, which turned into a Hindu-phobic nightmare, and some other festivals as well. And we intend to keep working on other the most common ones, and eventually we'll get into the more in the regional ones as well. And the idea is to sort of create awareness about these festivals. Why are they celebrated? What is the intention behind them? And then eventually get into the philosophy of it all. Why is it done this way exactly?
Yeah, could you just explain a little bit about the reasoning behind why Holi against Hindutva, why that's just problematic, and why they're just wrong?
Right. So at least like at the surface of it, it was pretended by the South Asian organizations that took it up. The surface argument was that this was a movement against Hindutva, which they were supposedly distinguishing from Hinduism.
Yeah.
Right. But then if you scratched beneath the surface and you saw the articles that were pushed in connection with those with that movement, right? The articles that the group that organized it was pushing on social media, if you started reading them, you'd realize they were not distinguishing between Hindutva and Hinduism, because very quickly they started attacking the festival of Holi itself, right?
Yeah.
So instead of being an event to mark the sad fact that Hindutva has taken over, transformed very quickly into an attack on Hinduism itself, which is not surprising because this is a very useful, like this is a very common trick, right? Any Hindu you disagree with becomes a Hindutva fascist terrorist or whatever.
Exactly.
Anyway, so we found that, and then in one of the articles, the argument that was being made as to the attack on Holi itself was premised on this facetious claim that Holika Dehen, which is the Choti Holi. So the Badi Holi is like where we actually celebrate with colors. In most of India, there is also a smaller festival right the day before. It's called Choti Holi, and in that you have a sort of like a pyre. That's probably not a good word for it, like a bonfire, right? It's
bonfire, yeah.
And at night, so the people from around the family sort of collect wood, and they throw in certain things, and then they collect together as a community and burn a giant bonfire, and then it's very similar to that. So they argued that the legend behind that bonfire ritual of Choti Holi is that it symbolizes the burning of the demoness Holika, from the story of Sri Narsimha from the Vishnu Purana.
Yeah.
So in that story, Sri Vishnu takes an avatar to save Prahlad from the demon Hiranyakashipu. And in one of the that's a very much more elaborate story, but in one of the segments of the story or from the legend itself is that actually, sorry, let me step back. Let me give you the background of the legend. I think probably many people won't be familiar with it. So this is one of the Darshavatar stories, and in this Hiranyakashipu is a demon who has basically he has a boon from I believe from Brahma, and he's trying to be clever, so he can't actually ask for immortality. So he's tried to be clever, and he's asked that no man or animal can kill me. I cannot be killed on the day or the night. I cannot be killed inside the house or outside the house, and I cannot be killed by. So he comes up with this clever set of combinations of the boon, so that which practically, for all intents and purposes, grants him immortality. So using that boon of immortality, he now, unleashes tyranny around the whole world, and he wins the three realms, all the three realms, not just the kingdoms, but the entire realms. And once he wins over those realms, he decides to institute a law, which was probably arguably the world's first monotheism, where he says that I am the only God, right? And all the other gods are false. And so now the only God that my people in my kingdom can worship is me, and everything else is blasphemy or whatever. So everybody else who tries to worship any other God is put to death. So this guy, he introduced this rule, and obviously, most people, ordinary people, are not equipped to fight him, so they obey, and the world is now living in this tyranny, and people are getting murdered all left, right, and center. When the biggest rebellion against him is mounted by his own son. And his son Prahlad is barely 7 to 10 years old. In the entire story, he's barely somewhere between 7 to 10 years. So he refuses to worship Hiranyakashipu, and he continues to worship Sri Vishnu. And so initially, he tries to sort of re-educate his own son. He sends them with a bunch of masters, but he wins the philosophical debates with each one of them. And they come back and saying, your son is too talented. We cannot win it with him, and we cannot convince him. So eventually, this demon decides to kill his own son, who's 7 to 10 years old, let me remind you. So he has this entire army of, his warriors, which are also demonic, and they have their own set of powers. And so he unleashes these warriors upon his upon his young son, and the son is trying to he wins. The son wins because he has the blessings of Sri Vishnu. So there's a bunch of these stories about how he defeats each of these demons that have been sent by his own father. One of those stories is the story of the demoness Holika, who, according to the legend, is the sister of Hiranyakashipu, of the demon king himself, and she has this boon that she cannot be burnt in a fire. So this woman's plan to burn her own nephew is to basically convince him, as she was her santi, so she convinces him to come and sit in her lap, and then she lights a fire around her. So the plan was that she will, be saved, and the boy will burn, and she would win it for her husband, for her brother. And of course, with the boon of Sri Vishnu, the reverse happens. So she gets burned, and Prahlad gets saved. And then fast forward, bunch of other demons come in, and then the story happens. And then eventually Sri Narsimha, so Narsimha avatar is half man, half lion, intentionally, because that guy has a boon that I cannot be killed by a man or an animal. So he becomes both. He has a boon that he cannot be killed during the day or the night, so he kills him on the dawn, when it's neither day or night. And then he cannot be killed inside or outside, so he kills him on the entrance of the house. The inside or the outside. And he cannot be, and there was another funny one, which I find it funny. Sorry, it's not funny, but the guy was trying to be clever, so he cannot be killed on the earth or in the air. Sorry, on the earth or on the air. He cannot be killed on that. Sorry, no, again, wrong. He cannot be killed on earth or on water. That's what the boon was. So Sri Narsimha raises his knee, puts him on his thigh, and then murders him there. So he's not on the earth or on the water. So this was the legend. Now, according to Holy Against Hindutva blog, that whatever the blog was, they claimed that this was anti-Dalit because Holika was a Dalit woman. Now, this is an extremely absurd claim. I don't even know where to begin this, but we wrote an article about this, and we made it a lot more than that. We provided a lot of background. But first of all, if the idea of placing caste in a story of the Puranas is absurd, and we shouldn't even try to do that. But even if I take that at face value, and if I do this analysis, guess what? Hiranyakashipu was the son of Diti and sage
Kashyap.
Kashyap.
Yeah.
And he had two sons, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. So by that standard, he is technically Hiranyakashipu is a Brahmin because Sage Kashyap is one of the seven rishis, and his lineage continues to be one of the Brahmin lineages. And because Hiranyakashipu is then Brahmin, so then Holika, being his sister, also becomes a Brahmin woman, right? So that but the absurdity, the fact that they come up with such an absurd comment,
Yeah.
it tells me that they rely on the ignorance of people, which is what I mentioned before. That they know that they won't be called out. They rely that most of the people would not question this, would take this at face value, especially in a country where the depiction of Hinduism is still like monkey brains eating Indiana Jones dudes. So in that scenario, it's very easy to pull off a quick one on the eyes of the people and pretend that you're doing social justice when it's actually much worse, and it's plain and open bigotry oftentimes. So that was the reference to Holy Against Hindutva that I gave up.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Yeah, so just to wrap it up, we're kind of over time. Well, how can people get involved with Shaktitva if they wanted to? Those who are watching.
Absolutely, thank you. So one of the easiest resource is definitely the website. So if you go to shaktitva.org, there is a get involved section. So there are many ways to do that. You could volunteer with us. We need some help with if you're a writer and if you're interested in doing some research projects with us, we can help provide the resources. We can help provide even some training on how to write about those articles, and we would be happy to sort of get through this process. If you already have articles, send it to editor@shaktitva.org. That's our email address. If you are not a writer but you still want to help out, once this COVID thing is over, we're going to restart our workshops that we want to conduct in various campuses. So you could volunteer for that. We could give you the material, and you could conduct, in your own campuses, you can conduct some sort of good, knowledgeable spaces. Eventually, I would also, if some of you want to start a chapter of Shaktitva in your campuses, we would be more than honored to do that, because that could be a consistent, like it could be a continuous thing, right? It could be a space for Hindu women to come and gather and talk about their issues and try to take up action in that sense. So it could be a practical implementation of Shaktitva. And of course, donations are more than welcome. That's a very good way of getting involved as well. And also, if you have certain projects that you think we should be looking at, if you want certain research articles to be done, if you just have suggestions, please feel free to drop that through the email contact form on the website as well. And so we have many ways of getting involved. Soon, I can't promise a timeline, but probably sometime this end of this year or next year, we will be announcing fellowships as well. Where we will be welcoming researchers to come and work with our experts and our the professors and the researchers that we have involved to work on certain projects with us. And so that could also be a great opportunity for students to get involved with us.
All right, that's amazing. So, yeah, just to wrap it up, just for students who want to get involved with Texas HSC. The link for the sign-up form will be our Instagram bio. So if you want to get involved with that, definitely sign up for that. And yeah, that's it. Stay in tune for the first bi-weekly discussion session that'll happen about 2 weeks from now. And yeah, that's it. Thank you. Thank you, Nehaji.
Thank you.